Name is Taylor Koth, and I'll be going over the contemporary problems within cloning. So cloning is a hotly debated topic in modern research. Many people argue that the moral and ethical issues within the topic outweigh the potential advantages we could see if the technology advances. The Genetic Science Learning Center at the University of Utah talks about some of the positive effects that cloning research can lead to, such as medical advances, cloning livestock, drug production, and reviving endangered and extinct species. Cloning is also able to aid researchers that are studying DNA while attempting to combine DNA strands of different organisms. In his paper, Moral and Social Evil in Human Cloning, a philosophical evaluation, Joseph Chukwuma talks about how cloning involves artificial reproduction and therefore shouldn't be applied in many instances. However, many people believe that the positive advancements are worth these kinds of moral gray areas. Although it is the view of some that cloning goes against the laws of nature, cloning has helped scientists understand genetics better, as well as give back positive products to help humans via the creation of tissues through stem cell research and cloning of animals to help aid in human welfare. Cloning doesn't always have to be applied to full living organisms. Scientists use cloning to clone DNA strands to better understand diseases. The National Institutes of Health talks about how cloning is used to map diseases, which can lead to strategies that reduce the risk of diseases through preventative medicines. With this type of research, healthcare professionals can detect genetic diseases before actual symptoms begin to show, so that patients can begin treatment at earlier stages and have higher chances of survival. Although these types of genetic tests have been in practice for many years, further research would allow doctors to identify larger numbers of diseases in the future. Although the cloning of DNA strands is not as heavily debated as the cloning of full organisms, it still has helped lead the way towards the cloning of animals and possibly one day humans. While stem cell research isn't typically associated with cloning research, cloning is heavily used within stem cell research. Katrin DeVolder talks about the ethical issues within cloning in her entry of the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. However, within her paper, she also talks about some positive outcomes of cloning via its use in therapy. DeVolder talks about how cloning is used for the creation of an embryo to obtain pluripotent stem cells to be used in therapeutic treatments of incurable diseases. These treatments are often rejected, much like organ transplants are rejected. However, with cloning, DNA can be taken directly from the patient to create genetically identical embryo that would then lead to higher chances of success within the treatment. Much like other medical advancements, scientists have cloned animals before beginning to think about human cloning. With these kinds of advancements, the National Human Genome Research Institute goes into detail about how the potential applications of cloned animals are used. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration decided in January 2008 that meat and milk from cloned animals such as cattle, pigs, and goats are as safe as those from non-cloned animals. This means that scientists are now able to clone domesticated animals for their desirable agricultural traits. This would potentially lead to larger supplies of these products in supermarkets, though we are still several years away from seeing those products on the shelves. Cloning research and development is an exciting topic that can lead to many positive outcomes for humans. Although there are some ethical issues within the field, many experts argue that the potential good that can come from cloning outweighs the negatives. Although a lot of technology is fairly new, cloning still has a rich history with many great discoveries.
All right, I'm Cole, and I'll be doing the historical context of cloning. For centuries, the notion of cloning only seemed like a thing of fantasy and science fiction. However, recent discoveries have appeared to bring this fiction into reality. The media and pop culture loves to use these discoveries as a means to gain attention through fear. Much of this fear is based on the argument that cloning threatens the future of humanity. Pop culture would like you to think that these discoveries, like Dolly the sheep, are brand new and have been created in a bubble away from the eyes of the public. One of the major worries is that cloning breakthroughs are occurring so rapidly that scientists and the public alike do not have the time to react or ration through the ramifications of such discoveries. Though these fears appear to be new and relevant to our present situation, the reality of this matter is far from true. Opinions over cloning have varied greatly over the long history This is a trend that has generally followed the various advancements that occur throughout the history. A basic understanding of this through the framework of a historical context allows us to understand that our current fears are part of a larger history of cloning. Humans have been using cloning to modify plants and animals going back to biblical times. Romans 11, 17, and 24 references the use of grafting, an early method of modification of plants. Early means of domestication of animals used selective breeding to bring about the best traits in livestock and work animals. They used what today we would call cloning to optimize production and make life easier. The early motivations behind cloning was to find the best traits in nature and to use asexual production to produce animals or plants that contain those good traits and remove the traits that are not desirable. This desire kicked off the science of cloning as we understand it today. The first uses of artificial fertilization occurred with sea anemones in the late 19th century. By the turn of the century, scientists had gained enough knowledge about fertilization and the fundamentals of inheritance to begin serious research into cloning. Experiments on sea urchins showed that it was not necessary to use fertilization to make larval urchins. This first experiment showed that the male was not necessary to produce offspring. This discovery also invoked public fear with references to immaculate conception, but no scientists it got closer to them to the secrets of life, further spurring on research into the world of cloning. A later experiment by Hans Spemann in 1938 led to his suggestion of a fantastic experiment where one could replace the nucleus of an egg cell with the nucleus of another cell and grow an embryo from such an egg. This theory of transplantation was greatly embraced by the scientific community for its possible medical applications, so much that Spemann was awarded the Nobel Prize. This research ultimately led to the development of cloned gene and cell lines, which in the 1960s and 70s began to be used to accurately create individual clones of, at first, frogs. Then in 1970, John Gurdon created the first successful clone of a frog. Though it only grew to be a tadpole, this still caught the eyes of the scientific communities. Many began to speculate it was only a matter of time before we began cloning mammals, which came true in 1981 with the cloning of a mouse. Fears generally increased during this time as worries of playing God began to surface. People began to contemplate the ethics and morals of human cloning as it appeared to be getting closer. These public fears did not stop the increasing research into cloning. Similar fears have tended to saturate the history of cloning with little to no impact on the actual research taking place. As we do get closer and closer to cloning, the public outcry appears to be increasing. The future of this research is only up to speculation. It is yet to be seen if the public will have any effect on cloning. Will there come a point when we say enough is enough and we stop, or will we continue the unbridled research that has taken place for centuries? These are all questions that can only be answered with time.
Applying what we know about the history and contemporary issues surrounding cloning, we're able to interpret what the future holds. Who has access to cloning? What can be cloned, and how will it realistically change the world we live in? Although we have cloned a number of animals and organs, our future use of this knowledge could change the medical, economic, and moral framework of our society. The medical field is constantly changing, finding new ways to reach new people, with cloning being the newest way of doing so. With the ability to clone stem cells and organs comes a greater amount of people that can be reached when a certain blood type isn't available or an organ match cannot be located, albeit there are moral questions as to whether this is ethical or not. Currently, stem cells made from human skin are programmed into an embryonic state, meaning that they can form and morph into other organs, primarily the liver and kidneys. These cells are still in the experimental stage, but we can see that in the future for people using these cells, they would need autoimmune suppressing drugs to avoid rejection of the new organ. This is the same as if they were in need of a human organ donor. Although the accessibility of these cloned organs is contingent on monetary capabilities and scientific output, in theory, this would allow us to provide greater care to a greater amount of people. Economically, cloning is the way of the future. Transgenic cloning, which is currently used in crops and pigs, clones a specific gene with a favorable trait. This is then placed in the embryo of the new animal, giving them the wanted trait and decreasing their tendency towards a disease that would decrease yields. Monetarily, this is a benefit in the genetic modification and cloning process of cows to improve their milk production in the herd. As our population increases, so does our demand for certain resources, namely food. Cloning would give us the resources we need to provide basic necessities to every member of society. Although we are currently cloning cows, we have yet to see the health impacts on humans. From this graph, we can see that the milk production of cloned and modified cows has increased over time. Cows also account for the most methane production, so would cloning more cows and increasing their population actually harm the environment instead of helping? These are the questions that scientists are considering before cloning can become normalized. The moral implications of cloning either an animal or a human are the largest issues that society will face. In reproductive cloning, using eugenics to choose gender, traits, and attributes would negatively impact the gendered ratio in society, population growth, and the job market. This has drastic impacts on society and the way in which we structure ourselves, making the future even more of an unknown. We would have a divide as a society to create a new class of people who are partially cloned and a new race that changed the way that humanity is structured futuristically. A new race and class of people will come the addition of human technology, giving us new ways to categorize people. Cloning is the type of intelligence that is our future, and whether we are for or against it, it's just a matter of time before society is riddled with products of cloning in many different fields. Understanding what the parameters of the cloning argument are can allow us to determine the ramifications of certain types of cloning before they happen. The ripple that cloning will and does have throughout our society won't truly be felt until the future, complicating the work that we are presently conducting and leaving us with more questions than answers regarding the economic, medical, and ethical implications that cloning presents.